Ron Ignace is the chief of the Skeetchestn Band in British Columbia and the chair of the Assembly of First Nations Chiefs Committee on Languages. He's been leading the fight to save Indigenous languages in this country for more than 2 decades, and he's with me in the studio, as you can see. Chief Ignace, good to see you. Thanks for coming in to speak with me.
Good to see you. Yes.
What does this day mean to you, the fact that we now have a legislative movement by the federal government in this country to protect and grow Indigenous languages that have been disappearing in this country for decades?
Let me say, white for white, peace, when Elias says, and Snan says, well, I ain't waxed, stem is petitensman and Anya, the sky is suchen the Qualtans. Thank you. I'm honored here to talk to you about how the government has moved towards recognition of our languages in legislation, in law.
What do you feel about the 20 plus years you've been fighting this to see this day?
This is, I mean, I woke up this morning just with a flood of ideas and thoughts about the future for our languages, and I was ecstatic. And I can tell you, I also had in my dream, our people were in full regalia and dancing and singing, and unfortunately, I woke up as that's how. So our ancestors in the spirit world, are all excited and ecstatic about what's happening today.
You woke up, but there's, dreams can't come true, right? So
and this is a dream come true.
Okay.
I would have to say that, truthfully, by, the inauguration of the International Year of Indigenous Languages the other day in New York, which I was happy to attend and participate in, and now today with the presentation of Indigenous language legislation to first reading in Parliament, to me, it's a great first step towards recognition of Indigenous humanity and our human rights across this country. It's a great day to celebrate for us and for me.
How many Indigenous languages are spoken in this country right now, and how many of those are endangered?
There are various numbers of people are saying up to 90, anywhere from 60 to 90 languages, but 50%,
and several dialects in several of those languages,
when you count
right?
the dialects,
Yeah.
it goes up to 90 from 60.
Yeah.
Many of the languages in Canada are there's only 3 or 4 languages that have large numbers of speakers. But the rest of the languages, for example, 50% of the languages in Canada are in British Columbia, and all of them are threatened, endangered, and some of them even just recently lost their last fluent speaker. So it's critical across the country. And even those stronger languages are getting weaker and weaker as we go by. So this day is a good day to begin reversing the shift away from, losing our languages to strengthening it.
Let me ask you how the languages are lost. I mean, mechanically, technically, we understand the languages are lost when there are no speakers left speaking them to pass it on. But why is that happening?
Well, for our people have been beaten and tormented through the years through residential schools and for our languages. And we were put into residential schools to so-called civilize us, and that meant doing away with our traditional customs, practices, but more importantly, our languages, and our languages hold our identity and our essence of who we are, and that has been taken out of us.
The bill creates a Commissioner of Indigenous Languages and long-term funding. Is it clear on the funding? Do you know how much money the government's committing to this and for how long?
Well,
or is it a proposal to commit long-term funding?
No, we're looking at dependable, sufficient, and reliable resources. Right now, we compete through grants, proposals, and we have 17 Shuswap communities, and each one of us have to write proposals to get a few dollars here and there, and we're competing against each other. Maybe 3 or 4 of us will get a small grant to do small work on our languages. That is not right. What we need is sufficient and dependable resourcing that the whole nation can work together collectively on to put together a strategy for reviving and strengthening our languages.
Tell me about that specifically. Give our viewers an understanding, okay, what can you do with sufficient, stable, reliable funding to turn the language issue around? Give me some specific ideas of how you'll save it.
Well, I mean, we need to train language teachers, our own language teachers. We need resources to establish language nests, much like they've done in Hawaii. I mean, the Hawaiian languages, Hawaiian peoples have done a great job in turning their languages around from extinction to now being live and well. And we need to do that in this country. And you're happy with today's announcement, and it seems most of the Indigenous community is. The Inuit in this country are not. They've called this a colonial process. They feel that it's top down through the consultation process. And one of the things they really take issue with is the creation of the Office of the Commissioner. They say there exists today a Indigenous Languages Initiatives program within the federal government, and they say that hasn't managed to save Indigenous languages in this country, and they're convinced the Commissioner's office will be symbolic but won't do any better. Why do you have such trust in this approach? Well, if they're talking about the Aboriginal Language Initiative, the ALI program, all there is in the ALI program for us is $5 million for all the languages across the country. In 2005, I chaired a national ministerial task force in which both the Inuit, the Métis, and the First Nations were involved in that, and we called for a language commissioner to help ensure that the language legislation that would be established will be implemented by all the various levels of government and agencies across the country with us. We did not ask for official language status, because what would happen, and this happened in parts of the country in which that was the case, all the monies went towards translating government legislation documents, and the people didn't get any. And with this legislation, we're going to be assured with $5 million. Can you imagine trying to fund all languages across Canada with $5 million? What would you do for trying to fund one of Canada's languages with $5 million? Right. It wouldn't work. So therefore, that's the dilemma there. And so this is why we're calling for, sufficient, dependable, and ongoing resources that we can rely on. It's a better process, and the Language Commissioner will monitor the efficacy of the language, as well as be an advocate with us for the language. And this is, as far as this being colonial, we co-developed this legislation. It's a historic development insofar as legislations are normally developed behind locked doors. But our team, we work together with the government to co-develop this legislation. So it's a totally different approach, and we see it as going to be really helpful across the country.
Let me finish on this for you. A lot of people might look at this and say, okay, this is a program that benefits Indigenous groups in this country. It saves their language. Why do you think it's good for the country, not just good for Indigenous groups?
Well, it's fundamental. Our languages are fundamental to who we are. It's fundamental to our identity. It ties us to our land. It allows us to understand our land. Our languages is also embedded in our land. When I travel across the country around my territory, and I see various landmarks, it has stories to them, and it reminds me of our history on the land. It tells me about how my ancestors lived and utilized the land. Those it's a connection for us. It's our national identity. It gives us our national pride as a people, and it encourages our young people to be, who they are.
Good to talk to you, Chief Ignace. Thanks for your thoughts on this today. It's a big day for you, and I think Perry Bellegarde said today, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, these languages are a national treasure.
They are, yes. And they are a national treasure. And it will, in Canada, taking on this legislation, it will help to move Canada to be whole.
Thank you for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the interview.